I'm very excited to have on Hannah Sabio-Howell, who is running to unseat Jamie Pedersen. She's in studio with us. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks so much for having me. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're happy to have you. You sent us an email. We had a local political consultant on the show maybe like a week ago or so. I feel like it was just before July 4th.
I wasn't here.
You were not here.
Yeah, what's this wee stuff? You got a mouse in your pocket?
Well, it's the royal we. It's the royal we. We had a local political consultant on, and he was saying that Katie Wilson, who's the mayor of Seattle, her endorsement of two new candidates who are facing off against incumbents is a kind of a high-risk political move. And you emailed us after that. You said, hey, I'd love to talk a little bit more about why I don't think it's high risk, why I actually think it's a good idea. So here you are in person.
Here I am.
And so tell me a little bit. You've never been in politics before, is that right?
I've never run for office before. I've worked in politics for the better part of a decade.
Tell us a little bit about that. Give us a little bit of your background.
Gladly. Yeah. So I started my career working in the state legislature. I worked in a variety of roles as a House legislative aide in one chamber, as a communications specialist in the other, in the Senate, where I was working alongside lawmakers on many of the policies that I'm excited to champion if I have the honor of being elected. So taxing the ultra wealthy, making it easier to build more types of especially affordable housing, fighting for climate justice policy, and ultimately investing in our chronically underfunded services like our K-12 schools and our childcare systems and our healthcare system. So I started there, and then I moved into labor organizing, and from there jumped into this race against.
I'm trying not to cry.
Spike, you're smiling a lot.
She's my dream candidate, man. Because, well, Jake and I come from different ideological points of view, which I think is a wonderful thing to have these days, because far too often we can't speak to people we disagree with. The priorities that you champion in your candidacy are the policies and priorities that I hold dear. So I'm very, very happy.
Are you in the Socialist Party?
I am running as a Democrat. I identify as a democratic socialist, but I'm specifically running as a Democrat to step into the future, to take the Democratic Party into the future that I think it needs to move into.
Do you think aligns closer with the Democratic Socialists of America? Is that fair to say, or is that not fair to say?
I think rejecting corporate PAC contributions and fighting specifically for affordability is something that Democratic Socialist candidates have been uplifting really effectively, and that's the same agenda that I'm excited to uplift.
Spike, you're very excited by that?
I am.
Okay. Let me ask you a question about Jamie Pedersen. Mm-hmm. So Jamie Pedersen, probably one of the more progressive candidates in Washington. Is he the top Democrat Senate?
I think
right?
he's
Top senator in
Senate
Washington.
Majority Leader.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of pushback have you been getting from, I would imagine, like very entrenched politicians in Washington Democrats in Washington kind of had their run of however they want to run things for a long time. What kind of pushback have you been getting as you're stepping in now?
Have you been welcomed?
Oh, this is a great question, because this is something I think you and I can agree on, that the status quo hasn't been working, that the cost of living has only gotten so much harder, so much higher over the last 2 decades. Sure. I'm running against a 20-year incumbent, so I would say on his watch, our schools have been underfunded, the cost of housing has doubled, childcare and healthcare have gotten increasingly out of reach. And so what pushback I've gotten from the Democratic establishment is this idea that the status quo is good enough and more of the same is what we need. And my campaign would say, and fellow challengers to longtime incumbents would say, believe your eyes. No, none of the Democratic establishment policies have been working for us if we can barely afford to buy a home, raise a kid, retire in Washington state.
Sure.
And so we are running against this idea that the status quo is working. And this is actually part of why I was excited to get to come on and talk to you. Is one of the things I wanted to raise is that the consultant that you spoke to, Sandeep Kaushik, is someone who is paid by Senator Pedersen to use some of these establishment talking points that Democrats have delivered, and Senator Pedersen is one of those. And I think not only is that not true, but of course the person who's paid to say that for him would say that.
I told him I don't know their relationship. I don't know if he's employed by him or not. If you say so, I want to believe you. I don't know that that's the case. But I told him when he was on the show, I said, listen, I'm not a fan of Jamie Pedersen, in no means, because I just purely by virtue of the fact that he got a bill pushed through, which the governor then signed, to bring an income tax to Washington state. I don't support that, because I think you would probably agree. I think Washington voters should have a say in how they're going to be taxed. And that had an emergency clause that we all know about, which means that it didn't get to be part of the referendum process, so it doesn't get to get on the ballot until somebody puts forward an initiative, which requires like double the signatures that a referendum would have taken, all these extra hurdles to make it more difficult to get that thing shut down. That, to me, is stealing the voice of the people. What's your take on the millionaire's tax?
Yeah, I totally hear that. Well, having come out of, like I mentioned, the labor rights movement, part of the broad coalition that had been fighting for a more fair tax code for years, I was excited to support the millionaire's tax, but I super agree with you that transparency and accountability in government has to be really present. And one of the things that I would criticize Senator Pedersen for and other incumbents like him is this idea that policy isn't something that we build together, rather it's something they hand to us, and it feels rushed and it feels opaque. And I think one of the things that I am excited to bring to policymaking, not only as someone who worked in the legislature, but as an organizer, is buy-in and coalition building and the sense that everyday people get to shape outcomes that are supposed to serve us.
It sounds like you probably do support the millionaire's tax, but I'm hoping that you're supporting it in a way that give the people a voice, whether or not they want it or not.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. And what I think it should have done that it failed to do was reduce costs elsewhere. So I think that what I'm really excited about is making our tax code more progressive. So instead of it being one that right now asks so much more of you and me than the biggest and wealthiest corporations in our state and the ultra wealthy individuals in our state, I think we can and should lower some of those regressive taxes like sales taxes and property taxes and business and occupations taxes, and then use things like the millionaire's income tax, a broader based tax code, to reduce those costs and invest in our services.
Let me ask you a question about, and then Spike, if you have a question too after this. I don't want to monopolize anything.
No, dude. Have at it, man. She's already got my vote. Go on.
Mayor, you don't even live in Seattle. Mayor Katie Wilson, she just proposed an increase to the sales tax in Seattle. Now, that's going to hit a lot of people pretty hard. What would be your take on that?
Yeah, I super hear that. I really believe in public transit investments as being one of those things that makes our city ultimately more affordable and more accessible. We know it's something that cuts costs both for people who would otherwise have to commute from further and further outside of the city, pay for gas, spend so much more of their time in their car commuting. And so investing in public transit is one of those things that both improves quality of life for people in our city and reduces costs. So I do think that the tools available to us that the city has are pretty limited, and this is where the state legislature could step in. This is where the state legislature could help pull the levers to make it possible to invest in public transit without raising sales taxes.
For full disclosure, were you part of the Transit Riders Union? Was that something you were part of?
I am not a member, but they've backed my campaign.
Okay. Here would be another question I would have. Are you worried that something like the millionaire's tax or some of these higher taxes, specifically in Seattle, are you worried that they're going to chase businesses away? That businesses are going to say, hey, you know what? Bellevue looks pretty nice to us right now. I mean, like, for instance, we did a story the other day where if you build certain housing units in Seattle, they take like, depending on the zone that you're building in, it's like up to $50 a square foot added on top of
to help afford affordable housing.
That's
right?
required that builders have to tack on to the price. In some buildings, that's like an extra couple $1 million into their cost for like your typically sized apartment building, versus what they do in Bellevue is Bellevue says, hey, we're not going to force you to give us that money. What we will do is we will incentivize you with 12 years of tax free on that property if you will put into the system. What do you think of something like that?
Well, here's a couple of things I'd love to point to. One is that the Fight for 15 over a decade ago was one of those instances where a cross-sector group of workers came together to say a $15 minimum wage is actually economic common sense. And the narrative at the time from businesses, in most cases, was raising wages is going to crush business, the economy will collapse, and employers will flee.
Sure.
What we know over a decade later is that didn't happen, and in fact, more people had more money in their pockets to spend here at home. And what I think this is a parallel to what we're seeing and hearing now, which is that when we make it easier to build lives here, when we make a tax code more fair, when we make sure more people have more money to spend, it creates a business friendly environment, and it actually makes our economy stronger. And I totally want to address. I think it's a super valid question. The other thing I want to point to is that a couple of studies have come out recently showing that things like the capital gains tax, for example, have pulled in actually 4 times more revenue in their most recent reporting than was expected by economists who thought that the capital gains tax was going to drive out the ultra wealthy or result in people domiciling elsewhere. And in fact, people, the ultra wealthy, the 10,000 people in the state who pay it, are in fact getting so much richer than we even knew, and they're staying. And so I think that's one of the things that we'll see continue to be true.
I got to push back on you a little bit on they are staying. They did just have to, this last legislative session, they did just have to change the law. Remember, they increased the estate tax to the, I mean, we currently have the highest estate tax in the country, but they increased it even further to like 30-something%. Was that the number? I could be wrong about
35,
that.
yeah,
35%.
last year.
Now, they saw that people were like, wow, don't die in Washington because it's really expensive to die in Washington. Now, we're talking about ultra-wealthy people in that case. I think the 35% number only applies to people whose estates were over $9 million or something. So it's like rarefied air. But that was still a big enough number. The state legislator said, hey, we got to pump the brakes on this because we recognize that we're scaring money away to other states, which we have seen. I mean, that's like a lot of people are seeing that. So if we're going to be increasing taxes on the people who are creating the jobs, we've seen Starbucks start to move out. We've seen people like Howard Schultz, who had a lot of money, start to move out. There's indirect, effects of charging more money to people who are very liquid and very able to move that money into a different state. Is that not a worry for you?
Well, what's still true is that Washington State, unfortunately, is the 49th out of 50 states for regressive tax codes, meaning that if the ultra-wealthy want to move elsewhere to pay fewer taxes, the only place they can go is Florida. And so you're not wrong that, Howard Schultz is one of them.
Idaho also, less than Idaho.
Well, Idaho has a very progressive tax code, which is actually one of the things that I point to as a surprising fact.
Idaho does have an income tax, which is like, what is it, 5%? Something around there. They have way less sales tax. Everything in Idaho is half the price of what it costs in Washington. So there are balances. So if we introduce a 10% income tax into Washington, and we have the super high sales tax, which is like over 10%, most in the state, third most in the country, isn't Washington just going to become crazy unaffordable? Like, who can afford to stay here?
No, totally. I think the model tax code, if I could just adopt one right now for the state of Washington, would be just like Idaho's, the most progressive tax code in the country. Because I think that...
But Idaho's run by people who want to see low taxes, and Washington is run by people who constantly are saying, we need more of your money. So like those two
because there's no income tax. That's why, to her point, Idaho has an state income tax.
Yes.
Which doesn't require them to have this regressive tax code that taxes the lowest earners at the highest rate because you're paying sales tax, property tax, all these other taxes to make up the deficit.
But they don't want the sales tax to go away. Has anyone proposed that it goes away?
Well, see, there's the thing. You're double dipping.
That's a big thing.
It is, and if you're gonna talk about it, well.
Isn't it not?
It is. Of course it is. If you're going to have an income tax, even a millionaire's tax, you have to talk about easing the other tax burdens on the citizenry.
Okay.
And you got to have those conversations.
But they're not talking about, all I hear all the time, and hopefully you can fix this problem if you get elected, all I hear all the time is they don't have enough money for anything. They're saying we don't invest enough in education, even though it's 110% more than it was 10 years ago. The budget for the state is double what it was 10 years ago. You have worse outcomes in K through 12 education, even though you're spending records amounts of money. We pay our teachers in Washington the third highest or fourth highest in the nation, which I'm all happy to pay teachers as much money as possible, but the outcomes have to be good. And I'm not blaming teachers specifically. We pay administrators in these school districts like $300,000-$400,000. Do you know how much the top paid superintendent in Washington State makes?
We're speaking with Hannah Sabio-Howell. You're running for the state's Senate's 43rd legislative district. You've been saying education is underfunded. You've said it repeatedly. Jake doesn't feel that way. Tell him why you feel that way.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, you're uplifting so many of the things that I have too as I run this challenge. Yeah, thank you. Because Washington State, you're right, is now 40th in the country for the percentage of our budget that we spend on K-12 schools. The state legislature in the last 20 years already got sued, famously, in the McCleary case for underfunding schools, contrary to our constitutional obligation.
Was that 2017?
Roughly then, yeah. And so people, just like you're articulating, are rightfully saying, why is life getting more expensive here, even as things are getting worse? And that's why I jumped into the race, because that's my question too. And that is what I think progressive challengers to longtime milquetoast incumbents are pushing. This is what we're raising, is that we shouldn't have to struggle. We shouldn't have to work this hard for things to still feel this hard. And that's happened under the watch of longtime incumbents.
So you're one of just a handful of progressive candidates challenging incumbent the seat holders. How do you, if you're lucky enough to win election, how do you make change in Olympia?
Yeah.
How do you fight against that machine?
Yeah. Well, if I have the honor of getting to represent the 43rd District, one of the things I will bring with me is my years of legislative experience, where, like I mentioned, I worked for a variety of senators across a variety of committees. I also worked in the House for the deputy majority leader in the House, and I worked for some of the caucuses within the caucus. So I staffed the Members of Color Caucus. I worked closely with the staff of the LGBTQ caucus. If I get to be elected, I'll be on both. I have seen how different factions within the legislature work together to move policy forward. This is also something that, coming out of organizing, is a skill for me, or is something that I learned from organizing shoulder to shoulder with workers.
You're at work in Washington right now, is that right?
Yeah, formerly.
You
I'm not currently.
Yeah, gotcha.
But working with organizers and across a variety of ideology, but for one focused purpose, which is making life more affordable, raising pay, making workplaces more dignified for more people. That's something that is a North Star for a lot of people across otherwise what would be differences.
I think there's not anybody out there who doesn't agree that things are too expensive and it would be great if we didn't have to pay as much for everything. Here would be my one suggestion as we wrap things up. And again, we're talking with Hannah Sabio-Howell. Thank you so much for coming in studio. We really do appreciate it. And I hope you're very successful against Jamie Pedersen.
Thank you.
I hear he's running for mayor, by the way.
Would you?
He knocked on Laura's mom's door.
Not as a mayoral candidate. He's running for his own seat.
Yeah, he's running for his own seat.
Okay. I'll believe when I see it.
But he's out there door knocking in Capitol Hill.
Please consider, I hope the DSA, please consider, just cut taxes. Just cut taxes for everybody. Rich people, poor people, just cut taxes. Don't let the state, don't let all these incumbents who have all the power keep spending money without anybody putting them in check. Just take away some of their money and everything's still going to be running. And then people who have money, like you said, people who have money are going to have more of it because it's not being taken out of our pockets. We're going to go spend that money and life will be good. That would be my one suggestion. You may not agree with it, but that's my suggestion going out.
I heard.
Perfect. All right. Hannah Sabio-Howell, thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
All right. We got a lot more coming up. Stick around.